Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. Archie and Benny dashed to their room after they headed upstairs. Hey Archie, Mommy's meeting Mr. Damaris tomorrow. Should we tell Daddy about it? Asked Benny with slight hesitation. Upon deliberation, Archie said, we have to tell him. They had kept it a secret earlier because they wanted Lucian to feel stressed about Roxanne's relationship with Jack. However, Roxanne's attitude earlier made them feel terrified. What if Mommy really chose Mr. Damaris? At that thought, the children no longer dared to hide it from Lucian. Benny asked gloomily, but how should we tell Daddy about it? They could not contact Lucian as they did not have a phone. Roxanne would be leaving tomorrow night and they did not know if Lucian would visit that day. Archie and Benny looked troubled as they thought hard about this tough question. After a while, Archie whispered something next to Benny's ear with a frown and the latter responded with a firm nod. Then they washed up quickly and lay on the bed although it was still early. Before going to bed, Roxanne checked on the children and saw that they were sleeping soundly. Looks like they really did not have a good rest last night. Her suspicions gradually faded. Little did she know that Archie and Benny were merely pretending to sleep. With their eyes still closed, they listened to the movements outside the door quietly. Only when they could barely hear Roxanne's footstep did they sneak out of bed. While listening intently for any sounds outside, they stared at the clock. They waited until it was just before midnight when Roxanne would have probably fallen asleep before tiptoeing out of their room and down the stairs. After walking to the corded landline telephone, they cast a careful glance at Roxanne's room. When they saw that the lights in her room were turned off, they put their guard down and dialed Lucian's number. Although they did not have phones of their own, they had already memorized Lucian's number, thanks to their exceptional memory. Before dialing the number, Archie and Benny had been worried that Lucian would not pick up the call as it was so late. But to their surprise, Lucian answered the call mere seconds after they called him. What happened? Lucian was working in the study when he suddenly saw Roxanne's call. The thought that she might be in trouble made his heart sink. Unexpectedly, Archie's and Benny's mysterious voices sounded from the other end of the line. Mr. Farwell, we have a secret to tell you. Lucian frowned. What secret? The children said straightforwardly, Mommy says she's attending a contract signing ceremony with Mr. Damaris tomorrow night. A grim look spread across Lucian's face when he heard that. Even though Roxanne had explained to him numerous times what her relationship with Jack was, he was still bothered about it. Besides, something bad was bound to happen every time she went out with him. First, she was pestered by Jessica. Then, she became the center of public opinion. Did you hear what we said, Mr. Farwell? Archie and Benny asked when Lucian did not respond. Lucian was jolted back to his senses. Knowing that the children must be secretly sharing this intel with him, he replied solemnly, got it. Thank you. The children did not dare to say anything else and quickly ended the call. Benny erased the call history before they snuck back to their room. The following night, after getting ready, Roxanne headed downstairs and prepared to leave to meet Jack. The moment she descended the stairs, however, Archie and Benny stopped her. Mommy, isn't Mr. Damaris picking you up? Despite waiting for a long while, they saw no signs of Lucian. They had no choice but to think of ways to stall for time. Roxanne was confused when she heard their question. Mr. Damaris wants to meet our collaborators early, so I'm going there by myself. What's wrong? Unable to think of a response on the spot, Archie and Benny exchanged a look, then flashed a grin and shamelessly blocked Roxanne's path. What's up with you two? Roxanne bent down and stared into their eyes. Archie and Benny fell silent again. But Mommy, Aunt Madeline hasn't arrived yet, Archie said in piping voice. Roxanne glanced at the time. Madeline should have left work by now. Although they had agreed in the morning that Madeline would come right after work, she was still nowhere to be seen. Since it was already nighttime, Roxanne was in fact worried about leaving Archie and Benny alone. Let me give her a call." Roxanne took out her phone and called Madeline, who answered the call immediately. Before Roxanne could utter a single word, Madeline's voice rang out. "Give me 10 more minutes. I was stuck in a traffic jam." "Ugh." Just when Roxanne was about to respond, Madeline mumbled, "The car in front looks so familiar." Roxanne could not help but feel worried when she heard that. "Oh, what's wrong? Is it someone we know?" The more Madeline stared at the car ahead, the more familiar it seemed. "It looks like it's heading toward our residential area. He's probably a resident here." Even after staring at the car for a long while, she still could not figure out who the owner was. Roxanne did not think too much about it as she said, "Be careful on the road. I'll leave once you arrive." "Okay," Madeline said before hanging up. Upon reaching the entrance of the residential area, Madeline watched as the car drove in and headed in the same direction as her. "Where have I seen this car before?" Madeline's expression froze when she saw that Bentley stop in front of Roxanne's house. "I remember now. It's Lucian's car." Didn't Roxanne say that she's going to a business-related social event? Why did Lucian suddenly come over? Are they going together? Madeline was filled with confusion. When Lucian knocked on the door, she hesitated, not knowing if she should get out of the car. After all, she knew very well that Lucian was pursuing Roxanne. If she walked over, she would become the third wheel. Meanwhile, when Roxanne heard the doorbell, she assumed that Madeline had arrived. She stood up and opened the door. "You're here." "I'll..." Before she could finish her sentence, she looked up and met Lucian's eyes. Silence filled the air. With her fingers digging into her palms, Roxanne pretended to be calm and asked, "What are you doing here?" She looked behind Lucian and saw that Estella wasn't there. Roxanne's heart skipped a beat. Is Essie feeling unwell? Lucian would always bring Estella along every time he met her. Since she was not there, Roxanne assumed that she probably had an allergic reaction. However, Lucian did not respond to her question for a long time. After sensing something was off, Roxanne pressed her lips together and did not utter another word. Madeline watched as the atmosphere between Roxanne and Lucian turned tense. She decided against stepping out, instead choosing to wait quietly in the car. Nonetheless, she couldn't help letting her thoughts wander. Lucian's actions are making me second-guess myself. If Roxanne hadn't told me he wanted to win her back, I simply wouldn't have believed he was a man who would attempt such a thing. Besides, the way he's acting doesn't look like he's trying to get in a woman's good graces at all. It's more like he's trying to reclaim his territory. The more Madeline observed the former husband and wife, the more she leaned toward the theory that Lucian was merely trying to reclaim lost territory. "You're going out?" Lucian repressed his anger and cast a cold glance at Roxanne. The man was clearly feigning ignorance, for he already knew the answer to his question. Roxanne felt somewhat guilty upon meeting the man's eyes. However, when she thought about the fact that she only met up with Jack because of work, her confidence began to rise, and she responded calmly, "There's a contract signing ceremony I need to attend in a little while. I'm afraid I don't have time to attend to you, Mr. Farwell. I hope you understand." A slight crease appeared between Lucian's eyebrows as he continued to probe, "Is it with Jack?" The question startled Roxanne. "How did you know?" "I only received the notice last night. Moreover, Lucian has nothing to do with the project, so how did he know about this?" The kids, who were in the living room, overheard their mother's question, and guilt was written all over their little faces. Subsequently, they quietly turned around and began playing with their Legos. Roxanne did not suspect her children at all. Instead, she wondered if the man in front of her was investigating her again. Lucian appeared to have seen through her thoughts, and his gaze darkened. "I have my ways." His words only increased Roxanne's suspicion. When she looked at him again, there was a hint of wariness in her eyes. "I don't care how you found out, but I'm heading out soon. I'd appreciate it if you would leave as well." "What if I refuse?" "The reason I'm here today is to stop you from attending the contract signing ceremony." The man's expression turned sullen and his tone was ice cold. To be precise, Lucian was trying to stop Roxanne from meeting up with Jack. However, Roxanne only felt that the man was being unreasonable. Are you done, Lucian? I'm only doing my job. What's the matter with you?" A smile crept across Lucian's face when he heard her feisty response. "The so-called job you're talking about, Ms. Jarvis, is it poaching from me?" he asked. Roxanne's brows creased slightly, for she couldn't understand what the man was talking about. "According to my understanding, the contract signing ceremony is between Damaris Group and Herbscape Group. What does Lucian have to do with this?" At first, Herbscape Group intended to sign with Farwell Group. Damaris Group must have pulled a few tricks to make Herbscape Group back out at the last minute and ultimately refuse to sign with us. Damaris Group's methods greatly displeased me, so I'm not about to let their contract signing ceremony proceed without a hitch, Lucian explained with a straight face as if these were his true thoughts. For a few seconds, Roxanne stared at him suspiciously. She thought the man was merely making up an excuse. However, she did not notice anything odd in his expression at all, which meant that he was indeed telling the truth. A strange feeling welled up within Roxanne when realization dawned upon her. All this while Lucian's dissatisfaction toward Jack stemmed from their business squabbles. "It wasn't because of me at all." Roxanne had been feeling troubled. She thought Lucian's misunderstanding of her relationship with Jack would cause trouble for the latter. As it turned out, it was she who had completely misunderstood the entire situation. A flash of self-mockery flitted across Roxanne's eyes. She was worried that Lucian might find trouble with Jack because of her, but it turned out that she had gotten it all wrong. All the while, Lucian was finding trouble with her because of Jack. Seeing the change in the woman's expression, Lucian realized that what he had just said might have been too suggestive. With his brows knitted together, Lucian was prepared to explain himself, but Roxanne beat him to the punch. "Since it's business-related, you can reason with Mr. Damaris himself. I'm merely a researcher in this project. Both my words and my presence don't carry much weight, so even if I'm not there at the ceremony, it can still proceed without a hitch." Roxanne looked at the man in front of her with a tinge of mockery in her gaze as she continued, "I'm just an insignificant member of the project. If I don't attend the ceremony today, my colleagues will assume I'm unsociable and bring me trouble in the future. Mr. Farwell, please don't put me in a tight spot." The crease between Lucian's brows deepened when he heard the woman's words. She had indeed misunderstood him. "That's not what I meant," he declared. However, his reply only made Roxanne scoff. "Then what do you mean, Mr. Farwell? Are you treating me as a punching bag because you lost a business deal?" Angered, Lucian narrowed his eyes. He could not think of a way to explain himself as he was caught up in the heat of the moment. Hence he reached out to grab the woman's wrist, not wanting to let her slip away. Without the slightest hesitation, Roxanne attempted to break free of Lucian's grip, but he was far stronger than her. "Lucian Farwell, what you're doing is pointless." Having grown frustrated after struggling for a while, Roxanne glared at the man in front of her. Lucian opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say to appease her anger. In the end, his retort was short and curt. "You can't go." For a moment, the atmosphere between the two was thick with tension. Madeline had parked her car in her own courtyard and was observing her best friend and Lucian from afar. She felt her heart tighten when the former husband and wife looked like they were arguing. Madeline did not want to become the third wheel, but in a situation like this, she was afraid that her best friend would end up being bullied. At that thought, Madeline hurriedly got out of her car and rushed over to them. When she arrived at Roxanne's doorstep, Madeline felt rather awkward, but she steeled herself and pretended as if she hadn't been observing them for a while. "Roxanne, what happened?" Lucien furrowed his eyebrows and loosened his grip around Roxanne's wrist when he noticed someone was approaching them. This allowed Roxanne to successfully break free. She walked past the man and said to Madeline, "You came just in time. Now that you're here, it's time for me to go. I'll leave Archie and Benny in your care." Once she finished speaking, Roxanne did not spare Lucien another glance. She strode toward her car and drove off to meet Jack at the venue they agreed on. Madeline watched as Roxanne drove away. Then, she shifted her gaze toward Lucien, who was still standing in front of Roxanne's house, and her face instantly fell. "I came over to rescue Roxanne, but who would have thought that she'd leave just like that? She even left me a huge mess to clean up." Trying her best to appear calm, Madeline cleared her throat and asked, "Mr. Farwell, what are?" She was interrupted mid-sentence when the man suddenly turned around. Madeline instantly shut her mouth when she noticed the gloomy expression on Lucien's face. Lucien, on the other hand, seemed to not notice Madeline as he strode past her and left in his car. It wasn't until his car had slowly gotten out of her sight that Madeline was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. Roxanne's car was nowhere in sight by the time Lucien drove out of her house. With a frown on his face, Lucien pulled over by the side of the road and gave Caden a call. Caden was about to give Lucien a call as well, so he quickly answered the phone when it rang. "Hello, Mr. Farwell. I find out where Herbscape Group will be signing the contract with Damaris Group," Lucien ordered coldly. "I can't believe I let her get away. I will not allow her to spend time alone with Jack without my supervision." Caden replied, "Mr. Elias wants to have a meal with you at the Twin Petal Hotel. He tried calling you, but you weren't answering your phone." "So?" The look in Lucien's eyes turned gloomy when he heard that. "I think I know why Dad wants to see me. He probably wants to talk me into marrying Aubrey. I just sent her over to their place yesterday and now Mom sends Dad here to lecture me. That woman sure knows how to gain their favor." "I tell him I already have plans for tonight," Lucien replied after giving it some thought. "I got it." Caden hung up the phone and began looking up where Herbscape Group and Damaris Group would be signing the contract. He gasped in surprise when he found out about the location and called Lucien back as soon as possible. Herbscape Group and Damaris Group will be signing the contract at Twin Petal Hotel tonight. Would you still like to cancel your appointment with Mr. Elias? Lucien frowned after hearing that. "No, I'll head over and see how things go." "All right." Lucien then hung up the phone and drove straight to Twin Petal Hotel. Meanwhile, Roxanne's car slowly came to a halt outside the hotel. Jack and Larry were chatting with each other while waiting for her at the entrance. Roxanne took a moment to regain her composure before getting out of the car and walking up to them. "Sorry to have kept you guys waiting." "It's fine. The guys from Herbscape Group aren't here yet," Jack replied with a casual smile. The three of them chatted away as they rode the elevator and headed over to the private room to wait for Herbscape Group's representatives. After about 10 minutes, the hotel staff entered the private room with three gentlemen dressed in suits. "Hello, Mr. Damaris, Mr. Morrison, Dr. Jarvis," said one of them respectfully as they all took turns shaking hands. As they had already discussed the terms of the contract beforehand, the entire process went by rather smoothly. After going through the contract one final time to make sure everything was correct, Jack, Roxanne, and Larry signed their names on it. Roxanne spaced out a little when she saw Jack chatting with the representatives from Herbscape Group. It reminded her of what Lucian said before. Herbscape Group was originally going to sign a contract with Farwell Group but cancelled it at the last minute and went with Damaris Group instead. I wonder what happened between them. She was snapped out of her train of thought when the representatives from Herbscape Group got up and left. Is there anything else you two would like to discuss? If not, I'll be heading back now. Archie and Benny are still waiting for me at home, Roxanne mumbled absent-mindedly as she stood up. She was about to leave when Jack stopped her and said, "We still have a celebratory party to attend. Everyone knows you're the main reason we could sign this contract successfully, so they're all waiting to raise their glasses to you. What will I tell them if you just up and leave like this?" Roxanne froze when she heard that and recalled what Jack told her before. He said one of the terms of the contract with Herbscape Group required me to attend their events. I didn't take it seriously at the time, but it looks like Jack wasn't kidding. Roxanne felt conflicted as she realized she had inadvertently betrayed Lucian. I wonder what Lucian will say when he finds out. Come on, Roxanne. We're going to be working closely together from now on, so it'd do us good to spend more time with each other, Larry chimed in as well. Left with no other choice, Roxanne recomposed herself and assented with a smile. The three of them left the private room and went straight to the banquet hall on the 3rd floor. Roxanne was shocked when she stepped out of the elevator. Everyone involved in the project was already waiting for her in the banquet hall. It was as though they already knew the signing of the contract would be successful. They all flocked over to Roxanne with their glasses raised. "A Mr. Damaris says you played a huge part in resolving the issue with our supply of medicinal herbs, Dr. Jarvis. Here's a toast to you. It's truly amazing how a young woman like you could make such great accomplishments in the medical field." Just like that, they surrounded Roxanne and kept raising toasts to her. Since most of them were her seniors, Roxanne couldn't bring herself to refuse their toasts. Jack and Larry helped receive some of the toasts on her behalf, but they didn't dare do much in the face of those seniors. It wasn't long before Roxanne started feeling a buzz from all that drinking. Meanwhile, Lucian's car had just arrived outside the hotel. According to what Caden told me, Damaris Group and Herbscape Group should be signing the contract on the 2nd floor. With that in mind, Lucian quickly made his way up to the 2nd floor, but Jack and Roxanne were nowhere in sight. It wasn't until he asked the hotel staff that he found out they had finished signing the contract long ago. The look on Lucian's face turned gloomy when he heard that. Did Roxanne go straight home after signing the contract, or is she still with Jack? He was about to give her a call when his phone started ringing all of a sudden. With a reluctant frown on his face, Lucian answered the call. "Caden should have told you that I wanted to see you, so why haven't you shown up yet?" Elias asked in a cold voice. "I just arrived at the hotel." "I'll be with you in a minute," Lucian replied before hanging up the phone and entering the elevator. He had only intended to come to see Roxanne and clear things up with Elias. However, Roxanne was nowhere in sight and Elias had already arrived. Ads by PubFuture. Given the circumstances, Lucian had no choice but to go and see his father. The elevator soon came to a halt on the top floor where Starlight Restaurant was located. Lucian saw his father sitting by a window the moment he stepped out of the elevator. The father and son duo both had expressionless looks on their faces whenever they weren't speaking, which made it hard for others to tell what they were feeling. Lucian walked up to the table and sat down in front of his father. Elias looked up at him and said calmly, "You're here. Go ahead and order something." "No, I still have things to take care of." Lucian turned him down without any hesitation whatsoever. Elias simply arched an eyebrow at him in response. "I know why you wanted to see me. You're here to persuade me to fulfill my promise to marry Aubrey, right?" Lucian continued. Elias nodded and got straight to the point by asking, "What do you have to say about that?" Although Elias couldn't care less about the marriage, he had to talk to Lucian because his wife had ordered him to. "I believe the profits I have provided the Pearson family with over the years is enough to repay old Mr. Pearson's kindness toward me. I'm also willing to help the Pearson family out if the need ever arises, so marrying Aubrey is completely unnecessary," Lucian replied. He then stared solemnly at Elias as he waited for his father to lecture him the way his mother did. To his surprise, Elias simply nodded after a brief pause and said calmly, "Do what you believe is right. I can't do much about your mother though. That's something you'll have to deal with on your own." Lucian was so surprised that he froze for a few seconds after hearing that. "Thanks, Dad." Elias nodded. "You said you still have some business to take care of, so I won't keep you any longer. Go and do what you have to do." The two of them were always quick and efficient in the way they handled things. Lucian got up and left without saying another word. After entering the elevator, he grabbed his phone and thought about giving Roxanne a call. Our conversation earlier didn't exactly end very well. I wonder if she'll answer my call. Meanwhile, on the third floor of the banquet hall, Roxanne was so intoxicated that she could barely stand on her feet. As if that wasn't bad enough, the splitting headache she had only made things worse. "Dr. Jarvis?" Having noticed her discomfort, Jack quickly stopped the people from giving her any more toasts. He then held her steady and brought her over to a corner in the banquet hall. Roxanne glanced at him in confusion when she heard him calling out to her. "You had one too many, didn't you?" "I'll send you home right away," Jack said apologetically. He had only intended to let her meet the people involved in the project. He knew there would be some drinking involved, but he wasn't expecting her to get this drunk. Roxanne was so out of it that it took a few seconds for her to register what he said. "Yeah, I did. My head hurts," she mumbled while massaging her forehead. Jack frowned worriedly. "Come on, I'll send you home." He then informed the others that they were leaving and helped Roxanne out of the banquet hall. Larry narrowed his eyes when he saw the two of them leave, but he kept his thoughts to himself. Ads by PubFuture. Roxanne's phone started ringing shortly after they left the banquet hall. At that point, she was so hammered that she could barely even walk. Had Jack not been there to hold her steady, she wouldn't even be able to reach the elevator. Roxanne rummaged through her handbag when she heard her phone ringing, but she couldn't seem to find it. The ringing stopped right as the elevator reached their floor. There was only one guy standing inside the elevator at the time. Jack then helped Roxanne into the elevator and pushed the button for the first floor. It wasn't until he looked up and met Lucian's icy-cold gaze that he realized it was him in the elevator. "Hello, Mr. Farwell." Jack greeted him nonchalantly after the two locked eyes for a few seconds. He then shifted his gaze toward Roxanne, who was still in his arms. The look in Lucian's eyes turned increasingly gloomy. "I thought Roxanne might have gone home, so I was going to call her landline. Next thing I know, I'm greeted with this. Not only is Roxanne incredibly drunk while she's with Jack, but they're also in an awfully intimate position. Dr. Jarvis had a little too much to drink, so I'm sending her home," Jack said in an attempt to add fuel to the fire. Those words had barely left his mouth when Lucian made his way toward him. Jack simply arched an eyebrow at him as he stood his ground. Without saying anything, Lucian reached out to grab Roxanne's hand and pulled her into his embrace. Jack knew his boundaries. Although he was holding on to her, he didn't use a lot of force, so Lucian was able to snatch her from him with ease. "What are you doing, Mr. Farwell? Dr. Jarvis gave me permission to send her home. How will I explain myself if she finds out I handed her over to you?" Jack asked with a frown. The elevator came to a halt on the first floor. "Roxanne is my ex-wife. Given our relationship, I don't think I need your permission to send her home. You will stay away from my ex-wife in the future if you know what's good for you, Mr. Damaris, Lucian said menacingly without looking back as he helped Roxanne out of the elevator. Jack, who was still standing inside the elevator, had a nonchalant look on his face when he heard that. Really? In that case, I suppose I'll have to leave her in your care, Mr. Ex-husband, he said in the most sarcastic way possible. Lucian paused in his tracks and shot Jack a cold glare. You are in no position to comment on our relationship. He then continued helping Roxanne out of there while Jack watched with a conflicted frown. Ever since Jack found out about their relationship, he had been wondering why the two of them got divorced back then. He also had no idea why Roxanne went overseas for 6 years after the divorce. He used to think that it was because of Lucian, but the way Lucian treated Roxanne got him questioning his own judgment. A chilly breeze was blowing outside the hotel entrance. Despite being out cold, Roxanne shuddered when she felt the wind on her body and instinctively nuzzled against his embrace. Lucian frowned slightly when he felt her do that. Keeping his anger suppressed, he took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. Roxanne let out a soft groan when she felt the comforting warmth. She then buried her face in his chest and wrapped her arms around his neck. Under normal circumstances, Roxanne would have been disgusted by even the slightest physical contact with Lucian. This time, however, she was sleeping soundly in his arms. Lucian felt his heart race as it was extremely rare for her to behave like this. He quickly carried her over to his car and had a hotel staff open the door for him. Lucian gently placed her in the passenger seat and helped her put the seatbelt on before driving to her house. The entire car reeked of alcohol, but Lucian kept the windows shut as he didn't want her to catch a cold. The car was really quiet since it was just the two of them inside, so Lucian could clearly hear her soft, steady breathing. Roxanne occasionally mumbled in her sleep as a result of her intoxication. Lucian felt his anger subside significantly when he saw that. Roxanne has changed a lot ever since she returned to the country. The only time she's so quiet around me is when she's tired. With a wry smile on his face, Lucian slowly increased the pressure on the gas pedal. Meanwhile, Madeline was keeping Archie and Benny company at Roxanne's house while waiting for her to come home. The two kids would usually pester her to play games with them, but that wasn't the case that night. For some reason, they both seemed distracted and barely paid attention to what she was saying. Madeline pretended to get mad at them and asked, "What's the matter with you two? Do you not like me anymore?" Archie and Benny shook their heads. "We do, Aunt Madeline." "Then tell me what's wrong. Why do you two look like you're in a bad mood?" Madeline pressed on patiently. "We're just worried about Mommy. We don't want her to end up drinking too much." "Don't mind us, Aunt Madeline," they replied while exchanging nervous glances with each other. In reality, they were wondering if Lucian managed to catch up to Roxanne or if he allowed her to be with Jack instead. They were especially concerned since Lucian and Roxanne had gotten into a fight before leaving the house. Ads by PubFuture. Madeline could tell that the kids didn't feel like talking, so she decided to stop asking any further and sat down beside them. "I thought I finally understood Roxanne's relationship with Lucian, but that argument they had earlier left me all confused." The three of them were waiting on the couch when a car pulled up outside the mansion. Madeline was the first to snap out of her daze and glanced at the clock. "It's 10:30. Who could be coming over at this hour? Is Mommy home?" Archie and Benny asked in unison. "Roxanne should be able to open the door on her own if she's home." With a confused frown on her face, Madeline got up and made her way over to the intercom. The first thing she saw was Lucian standing outside the door with Roxanne lying weakly in his arms. Ads by PubFuture. Madeline blushed a little when she saw how intimate the two of them were. She then quickly turned around and told the kids, ahem. I think you two should head on upstairs. Naturally, they refused to do that and simply stood there staring at the door. As Lucian continued ringing the doorbell, Madeline had no choice but to open the door and make way for him. Oh whoa, she reeks of alcohol. Why did she drink so much? Madeline exclaimed when she noticed the strong smell of alcohol coming from Roxanne. Archie and Benny came running over and tugged at the hem of Roxanne's shirt. Hey, Mommy. Roxanne was still in a daze after being woken up by her kids. All she did was shoot them a brief glance before closing her eyes again. It wasn't the first time they had seen Roxanne come home drunk, so they had already gotten used to it. Usually they would fetch her some water and medication to help her sober up. However, the two had a different idea when they saw Lucian carrying her in his arms. They then tugged at his sleeve and said, Mommy looks really drunk, Mr. Farwell. Could you stay and look after her? Madeline was a little upset when she heard that. She had no doubt that Lucian would take good care of Roxanne, but she couldn't stand the kids asking him for help while she, Roxanne's best friend, was still there. Madeline was about to offer to stay and look after Roxanne, but the kids were faster. They turned around and looked her in the eye as they continued, Aunt Madeline needs to go to work early tomorrow, so she can't stay up late. Madeline fell speechless when she heard that. What? I have to go to work early tomorrow? It wasn't until she noticed Archie and Benny winking at her that she understood what they were playing at. As much as I would love to stay and look after Roxanne, the workload at the hospital has been pretty crazy lately. Would you be able to look after her for me, Mr. Farwell? If not, I'll have no choice but to take a day off tomorrow, she said with a sigh. Feeling satisfied that Madeline was playing along, the kids shifted their gaze back to Lucian and waited for his reply. Since he had intended to stay and look after Roxanne all along, he simply met their expectant gazes and nodded in response. This is a little strange though. I remember Archie and Benny being mad at me for a really long time when I casually mentioned their biological father. I thought they'd hate me very much, and yet they've been helping me win Roxanne back lately. In fact, they're putting in as much effort as Estella. With my daughter, things are a lot simpler. All she wants is for Roxanne to be her mother. With Archie and Benny, on the other hand, I have no idea why they're doing this. People might think they like me very much and want me to be their father, but I have a feeling it's more than that. I think it's because they care about Estella and want to become her family. As a result, they'd rather have me be their father than put up with some random stranger. Madeline was about to leave but got a little worried when she saw Lucian just standing there with Roxanne in his arms. You should help her to her room, she reminded him. Honestly, I'm starting to question if leaving her with him is the right thing to do. Hearing her voice snapped Lucian out of his train of thought. He then nodded at her and carried Roxanne up the stairs. Madeline, Archie, and Benny quickly followed behind out of concern. After watching Lucian lay Roxanne down on the bed, Madeline reminded him to take good care of her before leaving the house. As she was walking out the door, Madeline couldn't help but wonder if Roxanne knew her kids were secretly helping Lucian. Could it be that the boys have found out about Lucian being their father? If that's the case, I wonder how Roxanne would feel when she finds out they've been helping him. Archie and Benny had no idea Madeline had figured all of that out. With the most innocent looks on their faces, they stood there in Roxanne's bedroom and watched Lucian look after her. After tucking Roxanne in, Lucian bent over to feed her some water before getting back up. He paused in surprise when he turned around and saw the kids staring at him. Archie and Benny, too, froze when their gazes met all of a sudden. A few seconds later, they were able to regain their composure and smile at Lucian as if nothing happened. Lucian frowned. You too? Archie and Benny tensed up but tried their best to maintain their innocent expressions as they asked, "What's wrong?" Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.